Okay, we are at the April 6th policy meeting, and I'm calling it to order. And do you have any announcements, Dr. Yanni?
There are no announcements this evening.
Okay, is the board ready to move the minutes from last month forward to the legislative meeting? I'm sorry, the committee, yes. We are moving, oh, do I have to make a motion? No. Okay, committee meeting. All right, that's moving forward. Next up, second readings.
Our first second reading tonight is student involvement in decision-making. All of the edits that we discussed at the last meeting are captured in here. I think Mrs. Ionetti, you had a suggestion of something to add or to make some language stronger in this policy.
And we did talk about this a little bit, but I think we threw a lot at you last time. So I just think under authority, it should say the board allows and encourages students to participate in activities. Because what we took out was the word permits.
Right.
But I think it needs to be clear that students are allowed to do this.
I have another very minor suggestion. In the last bullet, engaging in public participation at committee and legislative meetings of the Board of School Directors. There are lots of committees, you know.
Jenna?
So not a big deal, but I noticed the purpose and the authority are nearly identical. I mean, not identical is probably too strong a word, but I don't know if we need something stronger in authority or we're okay with, just kind of an encouraging statement. Typically it'll say, the board directs, or it's the responsibility of the board, or something a little more weighty than, this is something we like, but maybe that's just me.
I think because there's nothing in school code from which this policy is derived, although if we want to make the language stronger, we certainly can.
Yeah, so I'm trying to get over my problem that this is in the authority section in the first place. I mean, we do have the authority to take input beyond the input that is that we're required to take, and maybe that's, if we're making an authority statement, maybe that's what we're trying to say here, which is different than saying we encourage students to participate. I mean, this is in the 200s. I mean, so this is a student policy, not a board, not something directing us. It's something we are directing the administration to allow students to do or encourage students to do. I'm wrestling with, if it's an authority, what should it say? And if it's somewhere else, what should it say? If it's an authority, we could certainly say the board welcomes, I mean, it says, it's in the purpose, not the authority, but we welcome input from all stakeholders. If we want to put something like in guidelines saying, we encourage the administration, or we direct that the administration encourages students to participate, allows and encourages students to participate, that would make sense to me in guidelines. Or we can leave it alone. I mean, I think we're just picking nits here.
Definitely. I kind of like Jen's idea of saying allows and encourages, because to me, we're drawing on general authority in the school code to say, we're not only going to encourage this, we're going to allow it, because I guess in theory, we could say we disallow it. So to me, that draws a little bit of a distinction, and I really like that suggestion.
We will move this one forward.
The next policy is student rights and responsibilities. There was a question about the word deportment. I actually had to look it up because I never heard the word deportment before. Sure enough, it's a word. But I think it's a word that it stands out. I don't know that we need it. I think we can say it differently.
It's under authority, and the, yeah.
Well, so when you looked this up, Dr. Yanni, did you come up with a more English language word that conveys what it's trying to convey?
So deportment means a person's behavior or manners. You were testing my memory. I had to look it up again because it's been a while since I looked it up. Although I'll try to use it in a sentence 3 times tomorrow.
Does conduct just cover it?
Any other comments on this policy? No? Okay. We'll move that one forward.
We have a series of first readings. If you like them, I did the work on them. And if you don't like them, Andy Lechman, Lechman, did them. So I'm going to I'll let Mr. Lechman jump in whenever he would like. There are not a ton of substantive changes that we're looking to make. We're getting to the point in our policy book that our policies are up to date. So we're starting to see the first round of policies come back to us on a 3-year cycle, a little outside of a 3-year cycle because of COVID and the pandemic, but we're getting on a cycle. So the first one is 601, physical objectives. I'd like to direct everyone's attention to the language that we struck in the purpose statement. One of the things we've talked about in this committee at length is removing language that doesn't feel like policy language and language that's ambiguous, because if there's not a test for the language, it becomes very difficult to justify that you're either following the policy or not following the policy. So we took out the language that says, and in a manner that reflects full value to taxpayers, because there isn't a test for that. There isn't a way to really articulate. It's too subjective. So obviously, I think we've done a good job over the last couple of years of being transparent around budget increases and tax increases. So I think the language as written there without that part of the statement suffices. Mr. Lechman, do you want to talk about on the second page of the policy? Oh, go ahead.
Can I make a comment about the purpose before we move on? I understand why striking that language makes sense, but it removes something important. If it's left with all that's left, it says that we'll recognize the responsibility specifically for the delivery of education programs consistent with legal obligations. And if we were to do only what is required by legal obligations, we would probably need a much smaller budget. I feel like we're not only trying to meet legal obligations, we're also trying to meet our own comprehensive plans, strategic plans, district goals, et cetera.
Can I ask a question? Is it like, I think the term legal obligations is meaningless. Are they state and federal legal obligations, or if they are, I think that should be put in there. Because to me, and I don't know what a legal obligation is. Any obligation that we undertake is a legal obligation probably. So I think there needs to be some specificity there. And I don't, but to Mark's point, I don't think legal obligations and the language of manner that reflects full value of the taxpayers is comparing apples to apples. So I don't know how you address that, but.
And I guess the legal obligations are really the school code. I mean, I guess there are other obligations, but it's more than that too. But I agree that the phrase proposed to be stricken is so ambiguous, it doesn't add anything. I mean, I struggle a little with how to refine it more to encapsulate it, because, I mean, maybe your suggestion is right, Mark, to say in accordance with the other things, but yet isn't our comprehensive plan, our strategic plan and stuff ultimately is still driven by school code, albeit we adopt different permutations of it, right? But I mean, I'm not opposed to that language. Maybe that is the answer. The thing that I was going to say, and this is really sort of in the next section too, is that do we need a statement here, maybe to start authority to say, pursuant to school code, the board's responsible for the adoption of the budget, just to make it clear that truly that's where the authority for this stems. Because I looked at that next part and I said, you know, we consider it as one of our most important responsibilities, which it definitely is, but it all flows out of codes. It struck me that we don't have that intro any place, and I'm wondering if we need that. So I segued into something else, but while I had the microphone.
So I'll chime in. I agree with Mark. I think we need something fluffy in place of that that phrase, and maybe it is, yeah, in accordance with our strategic action plan, or responsive to the needs of our students, or something like that. Because and I agree with both Dr. Yanni and Jeff. I don't think what was there was right, but I don't think having nothing is right either. So I just think we need something else that's. The other thing I'll say, just on Jeff's point, I actually had the same thing, that the authority section could be a little stronger, because it is one of our key responsibilities. I mean, it says that we consider it to be one of our most important, but one of the questions I had on that was, technically speaking, Mark, this might be as much a question for you as maybe Mr. Leckman. Is the preparation of the budget a board responsibility? The adoption is, but this says that the preparation and adoption is one of our most important responsibilities. Adoption for sure, preparation I'm not sure.
Technically, it's all our responsibility. We delegate it.
That's fair. Yep.
We could be explicit about that. I don't have a problem with being explicit about that.
Yeah, I mean, if that's not, if it's not inappropriate to say that, I'm fine with leaving it. I just, maybe I'm splitting hairs there.
I think we do say it a couple paragraphs down, don't we?
That we delegate to.
Under delegation
Yeah,
of responsibility,
yeah,
there's
we
a new
do.
sentence there.
Yep.
I think part of what we're talking around here is the name of the policy is fiscal objectives, but what this really is a policy on the budget development process. And if we were to narrow the focus to the budget development, I'm not sure if we would lose anything by simply narrowing the focus to the budget development process, and then maybe the rest of this would just fall into place.
Mark, are you proposing that narrowing through changing the title, just so it's clear what we're talking about?
It might be as simple as that. I mean, I just had this thought, but based on your comment, so I haven't read through it to see if there is stuff with the new eye towards, is there stuff here that's not budget development process? I think not, but maybe there is somewhere.
No, I'm with you. I sort of had the same reaction as to a slight disconnect between the title and what the policy says. So maybe that is the solution.
Okay, and I don't think what's there in the purpose, like everyone else, I agree that should go. And I do think we should tie it in. I think it was a good idea to tie it into our comprehensive planning and those types, so that it's more specific of what we're doing. And I think that's a good way to frame it, Mark, is that this is the budget process, and that would make it.
Do we also need to put something in, or maybe that goes somewhere else, that it's sustainable, that it's something that's sustainable, that it's, I mean, when we talk about striking out reflecting full value to the taxpayer, I mean, I think we're also talking about something that is has long-term impact, that it's not just a one-year thing, but allows the community in the long term.
Right. So
to have-
again, if this is really about the budget development process, I think we don't need language like that. But if we're trying to expand to really fiscal objectives, I mean,
Exactly.
that's so big. I mean, then yeah, I would think you would need that. That's part of why I'm suggesting if we just narrow it, then we don't have to try to get into how
Well,
to articulate that.
or split it in two, have one that has objectives and one has the process.
Yeah, and there are other policies. I'm thinking the fund balance policy has some, and I don't have it in front of me right now, but the fund balance policy also has some sort of bigger goal language, which may, now that I'm thinking about it, may also not be the right place for that. But there are other places where we do have those kind of broader-based, longer-term goals. But goals don't really belong in policy.
Yeah, then the name objectives is misnomer, would you say that? Or do we need something like this as a 601 and then move
Steve, can we ask you to look at other districts' similar policies, and do they include broader-based goals, or is there a separate policy for broader-based goals, et cetera, when we bring this back for a second?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, any more, Jenna?
I have two very small things, I promise. Number one, in the purpose statement, I actually liked the way it read before, where it said to district taxpayers as opposed to the board's taxpayers, because the way it reads, it says, we recognize our responsibility to our taxpayers. They don't pay me. So that was, again, very small thing. The other thing was in the authority section where it lists, our motivating objectives. In number one, would it make sense to say educational and extracurricular opportunities?
So you found one. So that, that one's not really budget process. And I think the question is, if we were to narrow this to budget process, does that have to go somewhere else? And maybe the answer is no, maybe yes, but it certainly, yes, I mean, extracurriculars are clearly something important to the district.
Yeah, but that all depends what you call educational opportunities, right? I mean, is it academics, extracurriculars, and well-being, emotion? I mean, I think if we really want to split that out, we can, but I think if you use educational opportunities, that's the overarching set of programs.
I just think it's hard to say athletics, for example. I struggle with saying that's educational. It's something extremely important, but,
Well, but then why would it have a place in a school district?
well, I think it's like activities. I mean, I think it's important to kids' well-being, but I don't, again, maybe I'm reading the word educational too narrowly, but I don't view it as having strict educational value in and of itself. Nevertheless, I think it's important, so
I
to
mean,
me, adding it just highlights that it's not just strict classroom education, it's
well, I mean,
also
I think
everything else.
athletics and activities have educational value too. I mean, there's a reason that we offer, that they are included into the program. So I'm comfortable with educational as a umbrella term.
Just to chime in on this, because why not? The first sentence in this, before you get to the enumerated items, says that the process is motivated by. So to the extent that we are talking about the entire process of educating or providing a public school education to a child, and that includes curricular and extracurricular activities, I don't think adding it takes away from the fact that it is motivated. Part of our budget does deal with extracurricular activities. And I mean, we've certainly heard stuff about, we've heard about baseball fields and football fields and swimming pools and getting everybody back into those programs. It's important to the community. And I certainly think it's probably worth mentioning in that it is a motivating factor of what we do. We are trying to provide not just classroom activity, to every student in the district.
Okay, so
bring it back next month. I'll take a look at our peer districts. And in the meantime, when I take a look at our peer districts, I'll let the board know through a director's briefing what other districts are doing.
Does that mean this is, so are we looking at splitting this into two policies or, and doing?
Yeah. I don't know yet.
Okay.
I don't know yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's start with the default assumption that we can keep this policy, define it around budget development process, and if that turns out to be incorrect, then we can pivot. But I think that's probably the case, so let's default to that. I have one more minor one. There's a proposed change down near the bottom under public review of the budget. It says the district shall advertise the availability of the proposed final budget. It used to say preliminary. I think when we're talking about process, we actually have to advertise all three of the phases of the budget, or two if we take the opt-out, right?
I don't believe you have to advertise the preliminary budget. So
Okay.
This is specifically referring to the adoption of the final budget, and we have to advertise the proposed final. I think PDE may recommend an advertisement of the preliminary budget if you're going to take exceptions or apply for the exceptions, but I believe this applies to the final budget.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose that makes sense. And so, okay. I mean, this is just echoing school code anyway. We don't necessarily have to repeat school code in our policy, but if we do, we just make sure we do it correctly. I'm not saying we're not. I don't remember.
Okay, so before, I did have one comment. When we talk about track 1 and track 2, it's page 4, I guess, at the top. I think track 2 is a double negative. Based on the assumption that the board will not adopt and submit a resolution to the Pennsylvania Department of Education stating that property taxes will not be raised above the Act 1 index. I think that's so hard to understand. Like, I think we just get rid of both. What we're saying is that we're going to go above the Act 1 index. That's track 2. So if we just get rid of both nots, it makes more sense.
I don't know if that
Yeah.
totally solves it, because I think then you're saying the board will adopt, it's going to look very similar to the one above. So I think what it's saying is that the second knot is about what the resolution says, that the resolution says, the resolution we're talking about says we will not raise above the Act 1 index. And so track 2 is saying we are not going to file that resolution that says that we will not raise above the Act 1 index, right?
That's right. And we don't have to file a resolution. If we did want to take exceptions, we don't have to file a resolution saying so, but we do have to go through the preliminary budget development process. So there probably is better language, and if we're echoing school code here, let's just pull it out of school code instead of trying to make it up ourselves.
While we're on that topic, sorry, I didn't flip the page earlier when I promised I only had 2 more things. I had one more after that. Under public review of the budget, which is near the very end, there's this sentence at the end of that short paragraph that says, the public shall be informed of the educational implications of the budget following the approval, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know what that means, the educational implications. Maybe that's out of school code, but.
If we would have to furlough or cut programs, that would be part of the budget discussion. So we have not had to cut programs. We've not closed out programs since I've been here, but let's say, we found ourselves in a position where we had to go to the department and seek approval under one of the conditions. We would talk about that in the budget process.
Okay. So easy solution then, maybe we just say if any.
Okay. Anything else on this one? Oh, Go ahead, teacher.
I'm a little puzzled by the and/or in some cases, and I just don't know if I read this correctly. But in the first, in the guide, no, just above guidelines, delegation of responsibility, it says superintendent and chief or CFO and/or designee. Does that require superintendent and a CFO and a designee, or is it just superintendent? I mean, what is the trio? And then, or is there a trio, or is there a pair? And then at the very end, there's another one for the submission, or submission. CFO and/or designee. Can it be? Does it have to be and? Is it just or? I'm a little, the dynamics of that are a little unclear to me. And again, if this is for just technical issues, I mean, that can be resolved elsewhere. I just don't know.
I think we can just simply say superintendent and/or designee, and the designee, we can put in parentheses, chief financial officer.
Right. The only reason not to do that is if the board wants to explicitly delegate it to the CFO directly, bypassing the superintendent for the preparing of the budget development cycle. But generally, we don't do that. We charter the superintendent to do it, and he can figure out how that happens. I think so I don't think there's a need for the and in that first one. The last one, I'm not sure I understand the confusion. The chief financial officer, yeah, I guess, or designee.
Yeah, it's
it
just
doesn't
an
need to be
or.
an
I don't
and.
think the
Yeah.
end is required, and then that's where that was the clarification. That was a little unclear to me.
Any more comments?
Just to make sure, so are you saying that we don't both submit it to the PDE? There's
Correct.
only one of
There's
us
no
that actually
requirement that you
submits it.
both do, and the designee is not even defined. I mean, it seems to be, as long as it gets submitted, and maybe it needs the CFO's
Who signs it? Who signs the
signature, or
8057?
We both sign it, so Andy signs it, I would sign it, and Dr. Davis would sign it.
Okay, well.
So
that-
three sign it, but only one, it only gets submitted by one person.
yeah.
So
I mean, and this
that
gets,
could be the.
this
the
gets to
only
the point who
clarification.
actually does it, so that, who makes sure that it gets to, yeah. Well, then it can just say CFO or designee.
So if we're comfortable saying the CFO or designee down here, why are we not comfortable saying CFO or designee up top? It actually appears twice, once under delegation of responsibility and once under guidelines. I mean, generally, I mean, this is a philosophical question, right? I mean, in reality, Andy's going to do this. It's a question of, do we as the board want to just stick to the convention of delegating to the superintendent, and then the superintendent delegates, or do we want to be explicit about delegating? There isn't a right or wrong answer, but we probably should pick a convention and stick with it.
Although, you could make the argument that the general, number is a bad word, but the general umbrella of this goes to the superintendent, who then can designate it to the CFO, whereas the actual submission, sort of the technical wherewithal, really does go right to Andy. So I could actually see a distinction in having, really? I mean, I'm not wedded one way or the other, but if we wanted to, I think I can see that. But at the end of the day, I don't really think it matters.
I guess, ultimately, the superintendent is responsible. And so when, he's working with Andy to build that budget, he may be talking with the principals about their individual budgets, and it all then comes back to Andy. So, like, for me, I think it's really important to have the superintendent and the CFO in that one statement. I think that's where it's critical. At the end, we're just talking about who's submitting, and everybody's signing off on it, but that isn't as important. You know, I mean, I think we really need the one person to submit it, but the development of the budget definitely needs to include the superintendent.
This isn't the development of the budget, this is the development of a timeline, of a schedule.
Well, of the schedule, but they have, the superintendent has to be, I think, has to be involved in that. I don't see that as, like Andy doing that all on his own. I think he's having, he needs to have that conversation with the superintendent, because ultimately, the superintendent's responsible.
So is it important for, is superintendent and designee sufficient, or do you think we as the board need to be explicit that the CFO shall be involved?
Yeah, I think we should be explicit with the superintendent, because what are you saying, that you would only have, you would just have what? The,
Superintendent, so
Or
one possible
designee.
convention is we as a board, just ignoring budget specifically, just conceptually, we as a, yeah, we're spending
yeah,
time on that.
I think, yeah,
But
I
we
mean,
as a
I would
board,
agree. We
yeah.
could just say superintendent or designee.
yeah,
But to me, you know, we could waste a lot of time on it, but I'm just throwing my 2 cents in. I think superintendent needs to be included in that.
I think for the case of simplicity, I would argue that we as a general policy committee recommendation, we say superintendent or designee and let the superintendent figure it out. And unless there's some explicit reason for us to delegate beyond the superintendent, I don't think there is in this case.
I don't either. I think we can just say superintendent and he can figure it out.
I mean, the worst
Or
case that would
she.
happen if we don't, the superintendent could go and develop a budget and development and a budget cycle and everything without talking to the CFO. But we have other disciplinary process if that were to happen. Like, I don't think we need to be so careful.
Okay, so superintendent or designee. It is. Okay, any other comments now that I have my mic back? Moving on.
The, she's,
Designee to the rescue.
thank you, designee. I don't know, is your name in parentheses and bold and italics? Helvetica or Comic Sans? The next policy that we're looking at is 608 bank accounts. The only changes that we've made here were title changes.
Comments?
Do we actually need to explicitly authorize somebody to obtain quotations for banking services? I mean, can't anyone call a bank and get a quotation?
Can, like, anyone in the district call the bank and get a quotation? Is that,
It seems odd to have to explicitly, like, does the board have the explicit authority in school code to obtain quotations and therefore we have to delegate that responsibility to somebody? Or is it just sort of the convention of the banking system that customers will call and obtain quotation, potential customers will call and obtain quotations? I don't think there's anything in school code that we have to delegate here, so I'm not sure why it says that
the board has
why
the-
are we explicitly authorizing somebody to do it on our behalf?
the board has the authority to approve bank accounts, right? I can't open a bank account unless the board approves it. So that, I think that may be the only reason for that. So you don't want me just out there calling 100 banks and getting quotations. Potentially, I need to bring that back to the board before we actually authorize a new custodian of district funds.
But do we need to authorize you to obtain quotations before we do that? I mean, that's an extra step that I don't know why this is here, like.
I had the same thought, Mark.
Yeah.
I think the issue is really what we're delegating responsibility is to engage a bank. I'm less concerned about getting the quotations. We're delegating to get us set up with a bank account, which is not quite what this delegation says.
So I'm going to preface what I'm going to say with, I truly don't mean this snarky. This policy was adopted in 2014. So that's why it's here in a cycle tonight. So if we don't need it, then we don't need it, and we can just do a repeal of the policy.
I think there is some policy language in here that's important. The first thing under guidelines, for example, we're also, it's all three things under guidelines, really. We're asking the administration to do something on behalf of the school district or setting a requirement or limit. So those are appropriate policy language, I think, under guidelines. And as Andy said, we also, it's not really here, we need to authorize the administration to actually, we have to sign off on any new bank account. So we have to direct the administration to go solicit those for us. So I think there's something to be said in this policy. I just don't think the thing under delegation of responsibility is actually one of them.
I read that differently, Mark, because I read it to say that the policy is, as Andy said, saying that, the board shall designate the banks. I mean, we approve the banks periodically. And I read the delegation to say that the CFO and/or designee should get quotations for those banking services so that we know we're getting the best deal from a bank, for example. So I didn't read it to say the authorize is more, maybe it's direct is too strong a word, but to me, it was like telling Andy to make sure you get quotes before you bring a bank to us to be approved.
Right, so I think.
Did I lose Andy?
I think you're on the page that I'm on, which is, if we're gonna authorize a bank, somehow the bank has to be brought to us to be authorized. And the 9 of us aren't going out to get quotations. So we need to delegate somebody to do it and then bring it to us, and that's what we're doing. And then we're picking. Well, whether there's 3 million
Why
things
is
or
there-
not, we're talking about money. And so frankly, this makes it look transparent that this is how the process works. We authorize somebody to go get us the quotes, they bring us the quotes, we vote on it, we make a decision. That way, nobody's questioning, well, why'd you go from this bank to that bank? How'd that bank come in?
All right, so it shouldn't be, maybe my problem is just the verb authorized. We're actually asking you or directing you to do this, not authorizing you to do this. We're not just saying it's okay, we're saying, please go do this. That's different from authorizing. I think is what you said, Jeff. Yeah.
Wasn't even in my mic. How about deported?
So it would say something like, is required, is, okay, all right.
Sure. Next one is investment of district funds. Take it away, Mr. Leckman. He hates when I do that to him in meetings. Again, it is the change of titles. I think everything else in the policy, Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think everything stands true to what our processes are.
Correct. There were no substantial changes to the policy.
Comments, anyone?
It's really a ministerial thing in a sense. Under permitted investments, we list, there's like 8 items listed. And yeah, but like number 4, I guess my question is, and it's something we can look into, is number 4 a separate thing, or is number 4 really further explanation of number 3 such that we only have 7 items? So maybe Dr. Yanni and Mr. Leckman, you could just kind of look at that and before you bring it back. Because I'm not saying the language shouldn't be there, I'm just not sure it's a separate number as I read it.
I think you're right, but I think if you look at it, it's probably, this is a cut and paste from school code.
It could be, and the legislature could have done that, but let's just check. And I also think, just real quick, under restrictions in number 3, Dr. Yanni,
618 is student activity funds. As I'm looking over this, I don't see any substantial changes. Mr. Leckman, anything that you want to bring our attention to?
No, I don't think so. There's no major changes here.
Is there something to be said, and maybe we don't want to put it in policy, but something to be said about, maybe it's in delegation of responsibility, developing administrative relations governing student activity funds in accordance with, I don't want to say auditor requirements. I mean, there's the best practices or that kind of thing. I mean, the only reason to put something like that there is student activity funds are one of the areas that school districts get cited for all the time for not quite adhering to, is best practices the word, or there are real standards that, I'm not sure, but I know that this is an area of concern in general because so many different kinds of fingers have their hands in that particular pie, and they're not necessarily business professionals.
Sure, I mean, I think best practices could work. Certainly, like what we just saw was related to a GASB or an accounting standard change, right? Which is a little bit different than what you're saying here, which is best practices. So I want to make sure we separate the two. But you're absolutely right. I think we can come up with something, best practices. Certainly, this is an area of concern because the business office has oversight. But there's a lot of people that aren't typically involved in finances that play a role in the process, for sure.
Okay. Jenna?
Under definition, where it talks about student activity funds shall include the funds of board-approved student groups. We technically approve these groups.
Okay.
Some groups you do approve by virtue of having stipends attached to them. Or when a new sport, for example, is brought to the table. I'm looking at Mr. Leckman to see if I'm correct. He likes to tell me I'm not.
No, I mean, that's as much a question, I think, from Ms. Kitten, right? I think the contract, the professional contract sets out the all of the different extracurriculars, and they're approved through that process. So ultimately, the board approves the collective bargaining agreement, but they're set through that process.
Can you clarify or remind us what student activity funds cover? I mean, I'm wondering whether there's perfect overlap between the those things we approve as extracurriculars through the professional bargaining agreement and the things the student activity funds cover.
Student activity funds would be every group that would be approved would be a group that's covered under the collective bargaining agreement or is approved after the fact, and then, you know, it gets reconciled in the next contract. So any group that falls into this has to be school approved, and we have to set up an accounting structure within student activity. So it would be, it's not really athletics, it's really more student activities where you have groups like the environmental club that, you know, raises money to do certain things. You know, student government raises money and they go to different conferences, things like that. So I would say it's primarily related to school activity groups, not so much athletics.
My one, Jeff, you have a question? Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Under guidelines, number 1, the last sentence, student activity funds must be approved by the board. By that, do we mean like the listing of the fund as you present it to us, Andy? Do we mean the amount in the fund? I just got a little confused by exactly what that sentence is trying to convey. You get my distinction or my confusion, or am I confusing you?
I don't know that I have a great answer to that, so we may have to think about that. So which section specifically are you looking at here?
Under
Guidelines?
guidelines number 1, the last sentence. I think we should just think about what that means between now and second reading, maybe. I don't know if it necessarily requires clarification, but I just didn't quite get what we were approving in that language.
It's a good question. I mean, the distinction there, and again, it probably needs to be looked at a little closer, is student activity fund is separate from the general fund, so we need to have separate bank accounts for that. So maybe it's trying to get at that, but I don't know that I have a great answer for that. So we probably need to look at that a little closer.
And just one follow-up so I'm clear. So when we say student activity funds, there's a distinction between booster club funds, is that correct? So like if money is raised by the football boosters, that's not within this policy, correct?
Correct. There is a whole separate policy that deals with boosters, and they have their own separate accounting
Wanna make sure I got that
requirements.
right.
Yep,
Yep, thanks.
that money never comes into the district.
My one question about this policy, it says that the board is responsible for adopting and enforcing the rules and regulations. And then I guess down in delegation of responsibility, it says the superintendent will develop administrative regulations. I always get like this. I don't really understand, like, we're not enforcing this. We're telling the administration. Why is that there? And I don't see it in, occasionally it pops up in policies where it looks like we're telling the students or we're telling the teachers, but really we're not. All right, any other comments on this policy? Okay. That brings us to public participation. Anyone? Okay, I do not see anyone approaching, so I'm going to close public participation. Any other comments about anything tonight? No? Okay, so the next policy committee meeting is Wednesday, May 4th, 7 p.m. or immediately following the education committee. And with that, we are adjourned.